6 months into the war, humanity had become something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that grew stronger under pressure. The Kethvar occupation had triggered evolutionary changes in human behavior that were reshaping civilization itself. Communities that had never cooperated before were now sharing resources and tactical intelligence with seamless efficiency. Dr. Rachel Kim stood in what had once been the Harvard Medical School, now converted into a field hospital and research facility, hidden beneath the streets of Boston. She was studying something that should have been impossible. Humans were adapting to alien technology faster than the aliens could adapt to human tactics. The learning curve is unprecedented, she explained to a gathering of resistance scientists connected through encrypted video links from around the world. We're seeing tactical innovations being developed in one location and then refined and improved in completely different geographic areas within hours. The phenomenon she was describing had military historians baffled. Traditionally, military innovations took months or years to spread between different forces. But human resistance fighters were sharing and improving upon new techniques with a speed that seemed to accelerate with each passing week. Part of this was due to the communication networks that had evolved from Reed's original subway-based system in New York. But there was something more fundamental happening. Humans facing extinction were displaying a level of creative cooperation that surpassed anything in their peacetime history. In the underground caverns beneath the Rocky Mountains, Colonel Michael Chen was observing this phenomenon firsthand. His command center coordinated resistance activities across the western United States, but the tactical innovations weren't coming from military leadership. They were emerging spontaneously from small groups of fighters who had never received formal training. "Report from the Seattle cell," announced Sergeant Rodriguez, who had become Chen's primary intelligence coordinator. "They've developed a new technique for disabling alien patrol craft using nothing but automotive parts and household chemicals." Chen reviewed the detailed instructions that had been transmitted from the Pacific Northwest. A group of garage mechanics and high school chemistry students had figured out how to create directed electromagnetic pulses using car alternators and swimming pool chemicals. The technique was crude but effective, and within hours of its documentation, resistance cells across North America were building their own versions. "How long until this spreads globally?" Chen asked. "Based on current communication patterns, maybe 6 hours," Rodriguez replied. "The Australian teams are already requesting component specifications." This rapid adaptation was having a profound psychological effect on both sides of the conflict. Human morale was rising as fighters realized they were not just surviving, but actively innovating faster than their technologically superior enemies. Meanwhile, Kethvar forces were reporting increasing difficulty in predicting human tactical responses. War Commander Zexhai studied the latest intelligence reports with something approaching alarm. Human resistance capabilities were not following any predictable development curve. Instead of gradually wearing down under sustained pressure, the human fighters were becoming more sophisticated and more dangerous with each passing month. "They are evolving their tactical doctrine in real time," reported intelligence analyst Keth Moore. "Techniques developed on one continent are being implemented on others faster than our forces can develop countermeasures." Zexhai examined holographic displays showing human activity patterns across Earth. The data revealed something that challenged everything. The hegemony understood about conquest psychology. Instead of fragmenting under pressure, human society was becoming more interconnected and more efficient. "Recommend immediate escalation to total planetary sterilization protocols," suggested Subcommander Vithak. "The human resistance capacity is approaching levels that threaten operational mission success." But Zexhai was beginning to understand a constraint that the hegemony leadership had not fully considered. Earth was not just another conquest target. It represented the most resource-rich world the Kethvar had ever encountered. Destroying it to eliminate human resistance would be a strategic failure of unprecedented magnitude. More importantly, something about human resistance was affecting Kethvar forces in ways that had never been documented before. Several patrol units had reported what could only be described as admiration for human tactical creativity. Some warriors were even beginning to question the necessity of the conquest itself. This psychological contamination was spreading through the Kethvar ranks faster than military leadership could contain it. For a species that had conquered through overwhelming technological superiority, the experience of facing an enemy that could match their innovation through pure determination was unprecedented. In the depths of the Australian outback, Aboriginal elder Robert Chandrawati was training a mixed group of resistance fighters in techniques that predated human civilization by tens of thousands of years. His students included former military personnel, urban professionals, and teenagers who had never seen a desert before the invasion began. Technology is not strength, Chandrawati explained, as he demonstrated how to track alien patrols using traditional signs that their sensors couldn't detect. Understanding is strength. The land tells you everything you need to know if you listen correctly. His teachings were being recorded and transmitted to resistance cells worldwide, where ancient human knowledge was being combined with modern tactical requirements. The result was a fighting force that seemed to understand terrain and movement in ways that confused alien surveillance systems. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, now commanding resistance operations across northern Canada, had incorporated Chandrawati's tracking methods into her winter warfare doctrine. Her teams were using traditional Inuit hunting techniques combined with modern weapons to eliminate alien patrols in conditions that the Kethvar found nearly impossible to operate in. The aliens think like conquerors, not like survivors, Mitchell explained to her multinational team during a briefing in an abandoned mining facility. They expect resistance to follow predictable patterns because that's what happened on every other world they've conquered. But they've never faced a species that treats survival as an art form. Her unit had achieved something remarkable. They had cleared alien forces from over 1,000 square miles of Canadian wilderness using nothing but hunting rifles, improvised explosives, and traditional survival techniques. The Kethvar had simply stopped sending patrols into areas where their technology provided no significant advantage. This was happening globally. In the mountains of Tibet, Buddhist monks were teaching resistance fighters meditation techniques that improved reaction times and decision-making under stress. In the jungles of Central Africa, traditional hunters were demonstrating camouflage and stealth methods that rendered alien sensors useless. The synthesis of ancient human knowledge with modern resistance requirements was creating something unprecedented. A global fighting force that drew strength from every culture and tradition humanity had ever developed. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now coordinating resistance scientific efforts from a mobile command center that moved constantly through the American Southwest, was documenting these developments with growing amazement. We're witnessing the emergence of a hybrid warfare doctrine that incorporates thousands of years of human tactical evolution, she reported to the global resistance leadership. Every successful resistance technique is being shared, adapted, and improved upon by communities that would never have interacted under normal circumstances. But the most significant development was happening in space. The crew of the International Space Station, supplemented by astronauts from other nations whose spacecraft had been stranded in orbit during the invasion, had achieved something that terrestrial resistance forces could only dream of. They had captured an intact alien vessel. Commander Lisa Park stood in the modified cargo bay of the ISS, studying the sleek alien fighter craft that her team had disabled, using a technique that was audacious in its simplicity. They had used the station's robotic arm to grab the small vessel during a maintenance patrol, then vented its atmosphere before the pilot could activate self-destruct protocols. The technology is incredible, reported Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a Japanese materials scientist who had been aboard the station studying zero-gravity manufacturing when the invasion began. But it's not incomprehensible. The aliens use different engineering principles, but they follow the same physical laws we do. The captured alien technology was being studied around the clock by every scientist available to the orbital resistance cell. But more importantly, they had acquired something invaluable: a living Kethvar prisoner. The alien pilot, designated Subject Alpha by the research team, had initially attempted to kill itself rather than face capture, but the ISS crew had managed to keep it alive. And after weeks of careful communication attempts, they had achieved a breakthrough that changed everything. The Kethvar warrior could speak. "Your species confuses us," the alien said through a translation device cobbled together from station equipment and alien technology. Its voice carried undertones that suggested emotions. 3 weeks after the invasion began, the war had evolved into something neither side had anticipated. The Kethvar controlled the skies and the major cities, but humanity had turned the entire planet into a battlefield. From the frozen forest of Siberia to the deserts of Australia, human resistance cells were making alien occupation a costly nightmare. Commander Elena Vasquez crouched in the ruins of what had once been the International Space Station's Mission Control Center in Houston. The facility had been one of the first targets of alien orbital bombardment, but the underground levels remained intact and had become a coordination hub for resistance activities across North America. "Status report from Alaska Sector," she said into her encrypted radio system. The communication network that Reed's team had developed in New York had been adapted and expanded, creating a global web of resistance coordination that the aliens were still struggling to completely shut down. "We've confirmed elimination of 3 more alien forward bases," came the crackling reply from Colonel Sarah Mitchell, a former Air Force pilot who now led guerrilla operations in the Alaskan wilderness. "The Kethvar ground forces are not adapted for extreme cold weather combat. Their equipment malfunctions below -40 degrees Celsius. This had been one of the most significant discoveries of the resistance war. The aliens, despite their advanced technology, came from a homeworld with a relatively stable and warm climate. They had conquered dozens of planets, but apparently none with Earth's extreme environmental variations. Human forces operating in the Arctic, in high-altitude mountain regions, and in the deepest jungle environments found that alien equipment and physiology struggled to adapt." Dr. James Harrison, the former NASA engineer who had become Vasquez's chief technical advisor, spread digital maps across their makeshift command table. "We're seeing similar reports from high-altitude teams in the Himalayas and the Andes. The aliens' energy weapons lose efficiency in thin atmosphere, and their personal shields drain power faster to compensate for environmental extremes." Vasquez studied the global tactical situation with growing amazement. Humanity was not winning in any conventional sense. The aliens still controlled orbital space and most major population centers, but they were proving impossible to completely conquer. Every day brought new reports of successful ambushes, sabotaged alien equipment, and resistance cells that seemed to multiply faster than the Kethvar could eliminate them. In the Australian outback, a group of Aboriginal trackers and former military personnel had developed techniques for hunting alien patrols that relied on traditional stealth methods the Kethvar couldn't detect with their advanced sensors. Their knowledge of desert survival and camouflage had proven more effective than any high-tech countermeasures. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a former Army Ranger, led one of these teams through the red sand dunes south of Alice Springs. His unit consisted of 6 humans armed with modified hunting rifles and explosives, jury-rigged from mining equipment. They were tracking a Kethvar patrol that had been harassing Aboriginal communities for over a week. "Movement at 2 o'clock, whispered Tommy Nguyen, a Vietnamese-Australian tracker whose grandfather had fought against American forces in the Vietnam War, using similar guerrilla tactics. 3 hostiles moving in standard formation. Morrison studied the alien patrol through his binoculars. The Kethvar warriors moved confidently across the desert terrain, their advanced sensors scanning for any sign of human presence. But they were following a predictable path along what appeared to be the easiest route between rock formations. "They're thinking like soldiers, not like hunters," Morrison observed. "They assume their technology will warn them of any threats." The ambush was executed with precision that would have made Morrison's Special Forces instructors proud. The team had spent 2 days preparing the killing ground, using traditional Aboriginal hunting techniques to create hidden positions that were invisible to alien sensors. When the Kethvar patrol passed through the designated area, they were caught in crossfire from 6 different directions simultaneously. 3 alien warriors died before they could even activate their personal shields. Similar scenes were playing out across the globe. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous tribes were using their knowledge of jungle warfare to eliminate alien patrols with poison darts and pit traps. In the mountains of Afghanistan, former Taliban and Northern Alliance fighters had found common cause in hunting the alien invaders with tactics refined through decades of asymmetric warfare. The psychological impact on the Kethvar forces was becoming increasingly apparent. War Commander Zexhai reviewed casualty reports that showed a disturbing trend. Aliens units were becoming increasingly reluctant to patrol outside major urban areas. Ground forces that had expected to face primitive opposition were instead Encountering a species that seemed to treat warfare as a form of deadly art, the humans are not behaving according to any established pattern of conquest response, HFY reported to the Hegemony High Command through quantum communication arrays. They do not surrender when faced with superior force. They do not negotiate when offered survival. They do not retreat when confronted with overwhelming odds. The response from the Hegemony leadership was predictable. Increased pressure until human resistance collapsed. But HFY was beginning to understand that the leadership had never faced a species like humanity. Every escalation by the HFY seemed to produce an equal and opposite escalation from the humans. When alien forces began targeting civilian populations to break human morale, resistance fighters responded by developing increasingly sophisticated assassination techniques specifically designed to eliminate high-ranking HFY officers. When the aliens introduced chemical weapons to clear urban areas, humans began using stolen alien technology to turn their own weapons against them. In a bunker complex beneath the Swiss Alps, an international team of scientists led by Dr. Marie Dubois had achieved what many considered impossible. They had successfully reverse-engineered basic alien technology. Using equipment salvaged from destroyed HFY vehicles, they had created crude but functional energy weapons that could penetrate alien armor. The power source is beyond our current understanding, Dubois explained to resistance leaders during a secure video conference. But the weapon systems themselves operate on principles we can replicate. We've essentially created human-built alien guns. The first batch of these reverse-engineered weapons was distributed to resistance cells worldwide, and the effect was immediate. Human fighters who had been limited to conventional firearms suddenly found themselves capable of engaging alien patrols on nearly equal terms. Captain Maria Santos, the software engineer who had become one of the most effective resistance coordinators in South America, led the first field test of the new weapons. In the ruins of São Paulo, her team engaged a HFY patrol unit that had been systematically hunting human survivors in the city's favelas. The energy beam from Santos's modified alien rifle punched through the lead warrior's shields and armor like they were made of paper. The remaining aliens, faced with humans wielding their own technology, retreated for the first time since the invasion began. "This changes everything," Santos reported back to the Global Resistance Network. "We're not just surviving anymore. We're starting to fight back on their level." But perhaps the most significant development was happening in locations the aliens had never expected to be relevant to the war. Deep ocean research stations, polar research facilities, and even the few remaining operational space assets were becoming centers of resistance innovation. The crew of the International Space Station, which had been stranded in orbit when the invasion began, had spent weeks developing techniques for disrupting alien orbital operations. Using nothing but standard ISS equipment and incredible ingenuity, they had managed to disable 2 HFY communication satellites. Commander Lisa Park, the station's senior officer, spoke to the resistance leadership from orbit with barely concealed excitement. "We've proven that their space-based systems have vulnerabilities. If we can coordinate simultaneous attacks on their satellite network, we might be able to blind their fleet temporarily." Vasquez listened to the reports flowing in from around the world and felt something she hadn't experienced since the invasion began. Hope. Not for victory in any traditional sense, but for something perhaps more important. The aliens had come to conquer humanity, but instead they had awakened every human instinct for survival, innovation, and cooperation that had carried the species from caves to space. The HFY had superior technology, but humans had something that no other species in their empire possessed: the absolute refusal to accept defeat as final. The first wave of HFY ground forces dropped into Central Park like dark rain, their sleek transport pods punching through the earth and creating perfect circular craters. Each pod disgorged 4 alien warriors, their 9-foot frames moving with predatory grace as they spread out to hunt for the human resistance network. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez crouched behind the twisted remains of a hot dog cart, watching the aliens through her rifle scope. She had been a Marine sniper for 8 years, but every instinct she had developed about long-range combat seemed useless against these creatures. They moved too fast. Their armor seemed to absorb impacts from conventional weapons, and they appeared to have some kind of enhanced sensory capabilities that made traditional camouflage ineffective. "Target acquired," she whispered into her radio. 200 meters moving toward the carousel. "Negative on the shot," came Reed's voice through her earpiece. "Wait for the signal." Rodriguez gritted her teeth but held her position. The plan they had developed was insane, but it was the only option they had discovered that might actually hurt the aliens. 3 blocks away, Dr. Nakamura and his team were preparing to overload one of the city's main electrical substations, creating a massive electromagnetic pulse that would hopefully disrupt the aliens' personal shielding systems. The Kethvar had adapted to the communication jamming faster than anyone had hoped. Within hours, they had established new frequency patterns and backup coordination systems. But their ground forces still relied on the same energy shields that protected their ships, and those shields drew power from compact fusion cells that each warrior carried. "If we can create a large enough electromagnetic surge," Nakamura had explained during their desperate planning session, "it might overload their personal power systems just long enough for conventional weapons to be effective." The countdown reached 0, and every light in Manhattan went out simultaneously. The controlled blackout cascaded across the power grid as Nakamura's team triggered the largest man-made electromagnetic pulse in human history. The surge raced through every wire, every circuit, every electronic device within a 50-mile radius. For exactly 4 seconds, the Kethvar warriors stood exposed. Rodriguez pulled the trigger. The .50 caliber round struck the alien center mass, and for the first time since the invasion began, a Kethvar warrior fell. The creature's armor cracked, dark fluid leaking from the impact point as it collapsed to the ground. Around the park, hidden human fighters opened fire simultaneously, their weapons finally finding targets that could be hurt. The aliens' response was swift and brutal. Within minutes, they had activated backup power systems and restored their shields. Energy weapons began carving through the park, vaporizing trees and monuments as the Kethvar sought to eliminate the human resistance fighters. But the psychological impact of seeing their enemies bleed had changed everything. "They can be killed," Rodriguez reported, her voice carrying across the radio network to resistance cells throughout the city. "The bastards can actually be killed." 3 miles away in the flooded tunnels beneath the financial district, Marine Captain Marcus Webb was leading a different kind of assault. His team had discovered that the Kethvar had a significant weakness. They couldn't phase through water. The alien matter displacement technology that allowed them to walk through walls and doors failed completely when confronted with liquid. Barriers Webb and his demolitions. Experts had spent the last 6 hours systematically flooding key subway tunnels, creating aquatic ambush points throughout the underground network. When the aliens came hunting for the communication jamming equipment, they would find themselves forced to take predictable routes through areas where humans could control the engagement. "Contact," shouted Corporal Jackson, who was monitoring the tunnel entrance through night vision goggles. 6 hostiles moving down the main corridor." Webb watched through his periscope as the alien warriors approached the first water barrier. The creatures paused, their forearms gesturing in what might have been communication or frustration. One of them extended a weapon toward the flooded tunnel, but the energy beam simply dispersed harmlessly in the water. "They have to go around," Webb whispered to his team. "Just like we hoped." The Kethvar detoured through a maintenance corridor that Webb's team had prepared with improvised explosive devices. Not sophisticated bombs, but simple propane tanks wired with remote detonators and surrounded by metal fragments. When the aliens triggered the trap, the confined space amplified the blast far beyond what the explosives should have been capable of achieving. 2 more alien warriors died in the explosion, their advanced armor no match for supersonic metal shrapnel in a confined space. Across the globe, similar small victories were being reported. In London, resistance fighters had discovered that the aliens' enhanced vision was nearly useless in complete darkness, allowing human forces to use infrared technology and night vision equipment to devastating effect. In Tokyo, engineers had found that commercial microwave transmitters could disrupt alien weapon systems if properly modified and aimed correctly. Each tactical success was small, almost insignificant against the vast alien fleet hovering over Earth. But collectively, they were proving something that the Kethvar had never encountered before, a species that became more dangerous as the odds against them increased. War Commander Zexhai reviewed casualty reports from multiple cities with growing concern. In their conquest of over 100 worlds, the Kethvar had never lost more than a handful of warriors during ground operations. But in the first day of fighting on Earth, they had already lost over 300 soldiers to human ingenuity and desperation. The humans are not fighting according to established tactical doctrine, reported Subcommander Vithak. They use their infrastructure as weapons, sacrifice their technology to create advantages, and adapt their strategy faster than our models predicted. HFY studied holographic displays showing human resistance activities across the planet. Each engagement revealed new human capabilities that their long-range observations had failed to detect. The species that had seemed so primitive from a distance was proving to be remarkably creative when facing extinction. Recommend increased orbital bombardment to neutralize human defensive positions, Vithak suggested. Negative, HFY replied after a moment of consideration. The hegemony requires this planet's resources intact. Excessive bombardment would reduce the world's value significantly. This was the constraint that the aliens hadn't fully considered. Their empire was built on efficient resource extraction and minimal damage to conquered worlds. They needed Earth's cities, its infrastructure, its agricultural systems. Destroying the planet to defeat its inhabitants would defeat the purpose of the invasion entirely. But they had also underestimated the cost of trying to conquer humanity while keeping the planet intact. Every building could hide human fighters. Every subway tunnel could become an ambush point. Every piece of civilian infrastructure could be turned into a weapon. Back in the subway tunnels beneath Manhattan, Reed received reports from around the world that confirmed what he had begun to suspect. The aliens were holding back, limiting their use of devastating orbital weapons. They wanted Earth undamaged, which meant they had to fight humans on humanity's terms. "We're not going to win through military superiority," he told his assembled team, "but we might just win through sheer bloody-mindedness." Sarah Chen, monitoring communications from the improvised command center, looked up from her displays. "I'm getting reports that civilian populations in rural areas are beginning to organize resistance networks. Farmers, hunters, retired military personnel. It's spreading beyond the cities." Reed nodded grimly. The aliens had made another crucial error in their assessment of humanity. They had assumed that controlling the major population centers would be sufficient to control the entire species. But humans were scattered across every continent, in small towns and rural communities where alien surveillance was minimal, and traditional hunting skills could be adapted for guerrilla warfare. The HFY had come to conquer a civilization. Instead, they had awakened a species. Major Jackson Reed had been a demolitions expert for 15 years, but nothing in his military training had prepared him for the conversation happening in the abandoned subway tunnel beneath Manhattan. Around him sat an impossible collection of people: physicists from Columbia University, hackers from Silicon Valley, retired Special Forces operators, and even a few former NASA engineers who had been living in the city when the ships arrived. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, a quantum physicist whose research had been considered purely theoretical just days ago, spread hand-drawn diagrams across a makeshift table. "The aliens' shielding technology creates a localized distortion in electromagnetic fields," he explained to the group. "But every field has resonance frequencies. If we can identify the specific wavelength their shields operate on, we might be able to disrupt them." "Might isn't good enough," Reed replied, studying the sketches. "We need certainty. One shot is all we're going to get." Above ground, the world was watching the clock tick down to the alien ultimatum. Television broadcasts showed government officials in heated discussions, military leaders moving troops into position, and millions of civilians evacuating major cities. But Reed and his team knew that conventional responses would be useless. The aliens had demonstrated their technological superiority too clearly for anyone to believe that normal warfare could succeed. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, a software engineer who had been trapped in the city during the invasion, had been monitoring alien communications using modified amateur radio equipment. She discovered that the HFY ships were constantly transmitting low-frequency signals to coordinate their movements. "It's like they're using a mesh network," Maria explained, her laptop screen filled with cascading data. "Each ship maintains constant contact with every other ship in the fleet. If we could inject interference into that network, we might be able to create blind spots in their coordination." Reed felt the first spark of hope he'd experienced since watching those massive ships blot out the sky. "What would we need to make that happen?" Access to a major broadcasting facility and about 6 hours to jury-rig a signal amplifier, Maria replied. The problem is that every major transmission site in the city is within range of the alien ships. We'd be walking into their territory. Dr. Nakamura looked up from his calculations. There might be another way. The subway system creates a natural Faraday cage. If we could string antenna wire through the tunnels and connect it to multiple broadcast points simultaneously, we could create a distributed transmission system that would be much harder for them to locate and shut down. Meanwhile, in other parts of the world, similar groups were forming with the same desperate determination. In London, a team of SAS veterans was working with Cambridge professors to develop improvised electromagnetic pulse devices. In Tokyo, engineers from Sony and Nintendo were collaborating with Japanese Self-Defense Force officers to create directed energy weapons using commercial electronics. The aliens, confident in their technological superiority, had made their first tactical error. They had positioned their ships over major population centers to maximize psychological impact. But this also meant they were surrounded by the very infrastructure that creative humans could turn into weapons. Reed's team worked through the night, crawling through maintenance tunnels and abandoned sections of the subway system. They strung miles of copper wire, connected improvised amplifiers, and created a network that snaked beneath the alien fleet, like electronic veins. Each connection point was manned by volunteers who understood they might not survive the next few hours. Sarah Chen had joined the effort, using her knowledge of the city's building layouts to help map optimal antenna placement. As dawn approached and the alien deadline loomed, she found herself crouched in a utility room 50 feet below street level, watching Dr. Nakamura make final adjustments to their makeshift weapon. "The theory is sound," he whispered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool underground air. "But we're essentially trying to jam a communication system that's centuries more advanced than anything we've ever built." "Humans have been defeating superior technology for thousands of years," Reed replied, checking his watch. "David didn't beat Goliath because he had better weapons. He won because he thought differently about the problem." The first test came at exactly 11:47 a.m., just 13 minutes before the alien ultimatum expired. Maria initiated the signal transmission from her jury-rigged control station, sending a complex interference pattern through the wire network they had built beneath the city. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The alien ships continued their silent hovering, their dark surfaces reflecting the morning sunlight. Then, almost imperceptibly, one of the smaller patrol craft began to drift slightly off course. "It's working," Maria shouted, her voice echoing through the tunnel. "I'm seeing disruption in their coordination signals." Reed keyed his radio to contact the other teams scattered throughout the subway system. "All stations initiate full transmission. Give them everything we've got." The effect was immediate and dramatic. Across Manhattan, the smaller alien vessels began moving erratically, no longer maintaining their perfect formation patterns. Several patrol craft actually collided with each other as their pilots struggled to maintain control without their coordination network. But the victory was short-lived. The massive mothership above Central Park began to glow with an ominous purple light, and energy readings on Maria's equipment spiked beyond measurable levels. "They're adapting," she warned. "The signal pattern is changing faster than I can compensate." War Commander HFY stood on the command deck of the primary assault vessel, its four arms moving rapidly across holographic control interfaces. The humans had surprised them with their crude but effective interference attack. No other species in the hegemony's long history of conquest had managed to disrupt Kethvar communications, even temporarily. "Analysis of the interference source," HFY commanded. "Multiple transmission points throughout the underground infrastructure of the city," came the reply from a subordinate. "The humans have created a distributed network using primitive copper conductors and electromagnetic amplifiers." HFY made a sound that might have been admiration if the Kethvar were capable of such emotion. "Clever. They compensated for technological inferiority through innovation and resourcefulness." "Orders, War Commander? Begin ground assault immediately. These humans have demonstrated that they cannot be safely ignored. Neutralize the interference network and initiate full occupation protocols." Below ground, Reed watched as his radio crackled with reports from around the world. Similar disruption attacks were being launched in every major city, each one forcing the aliens to adapt and respond. Humanity wasn't winning. But for the first time since the invasion began, they were fighting back effectively. "How long can we maintain this?" Sarah asked, watching the data streams on Maria's monitors. "Not long," Reed admitted, "but long enough to prove something important." "What's that?" Reed smiled grimly as alien ground forces began deploying from their ships above. "That humans don't surrender ever." The morning sky over New York City erupted in brilliant flashes of light that had nothing to do with the sunrise. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the window of her 42nd floor apartment, watching as massive shadows began to blot out the dawn. The ships were enormous beyond comprehension, each one easily the size of Manhattan itself, their sleek surfaces reflecting the city lights like polished obsidian. Her phone buzzed frantically with emergency alerts, but the messages were all the same. "Stay indoors. Await further instructions. Do not panic." Sarah almost laughed at that last part. How could anyone not panic when alien vessels were hanging in the sky like monuments to humanity's insignificance? Across the globe, the same scene played out in every major city. London, Tokyo, Beijing, Mumbai, São Paulo all found themselves under the shadow of the hegemony fleet. The aliens called themselves the Kethvar, and their message was simple and terrifying in its clarity. They had come to claim Earth and integrate its resources into their vast interstellar empire. Humanity had 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. The Kethvar had been watching Earth for decades, studying human civilization through intercepted communications and long-range observations. They knew about human weapons, human technology, human military capabilities. What they saw was a primitive species barely capable of reaching their own moon, armed with crude chemical rockets and nuclear weapons that would be useless against their advanced shielding technology. President Martinez stood in the Situation Room, surrounded by military advisors whose faces reflected the same grim reality. General Harrison spread satellite images across the table, each one showing the impossible scale of what they faced. The alien ships didn't just hover above cities. They controlled the orbital space around Earth completely. Dozens of smaller vessels patrolled between the motherships, their purpose unclear but their message obvious. Escape was not an option. "How many people are we talking about?" Martinez asked, though she already dreaded the answer. "Best estimates put it at over 2 billion people directly under the ships," Harrison replied. "But their range of influence appears to extend much further. Our satellites are picking up some kind of energy field that's disrupting communications across entire continents." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the president's chief science advisor, pulled up holographic displays showing the alien technology in action. Their ships are generating massive electromagnetic fields that are interfering with everything from cell phones to our most advanced military systems. It's like they're creating dead zones wherever they position themselves. The footage from around the world told the same story everywhere. Military jets that approached the alien vessels simply fell from the sky, their electronics fried by invisible energy waves. Missiles launched at the ships detonated harmlessly against barriers that seemed to bend reality itself. Tank columns found their engines dying as they moved within range of the alien influence. But it wasn't just technology that the Kethvar had mastered. Early reports from ground teams near the landing sites spoke of aliens that stood nearly 9 feet tall, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws and skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their weapons were unlike anything in human experience. Energy rifles that could vaporize a tank or stun a human into unconsciousness, depending on their setting. Sarah watched from her window as one of the smaller alien craft descended toward Central Park. The ship moved with impossible grace, defying everything she knew about physics and aerodynamics. It didn't produce exhaust or make sound, but simply glided through the air as if gravity was merely a suggestion. When it touched down, the grass beneath it withered and died in perfect geometric patterns. The first face-to-face contact happened in Geneva, where UN Secretary General Robert Kim had volunteered to meet with the alien representatives. The footage was broadcast globally, showing Kim standing in the UN Assembly Hall as 3 Kethvar entered through doors that had been sealed moments before. Their technology allowed them to phase through solid matter at will. The lead alien, who identified itself as War Commander Zexhai, spoke in perfect English through some kind of translation device that made its voice sound like grinding metal. Its message was delivered with the casual indifference of a farmer discussing the harvest of crops. "Your species has reached the threshold of space travel Making you eligible for integration into the hegemony, HFY announced. You will be relocated to designated worlds where your biological distinctiveness will be preserved for study. Your planet's resources will be harvested efficiently. Resistance will result in the elimination of your species. Kim tried to negotiate, offering trade agreements and peaceful coexistence, but HFY dismissed every proposal with a gesture of one of its four arms. The aliens had no interest in partnership. Humanity was simply another resource to be cataloged and utilized. As the broadcast ended, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected. Not despair, but anger. The HFY spoke about humans like they were insects to be collected. Their entire civilization reduced to a line item in some cosmic inventory. They had studied human technology and found it wanting. Human military might and dismissed it as irrelevant. But Sarah knew something about humans that perhaps the aliens hadn't learned from their distant observations. She had seen what people could do when their backs were against the wall. She had read about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, about farmers with hunting rifles facing down professional armies, about civilians who chose to fight impossible odds rather than surrender their freedom. The HFY had made one critical error in their assessment of humanity. They had studied human tools and human weapons, but they had failed to understand the human spirit. They saw a species that had barely reached its own moon and assumed technological inferiority meant total inferiority. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began typing. If these aliens thought humanity would simply roll over and accept extinction, they were about to learn that humans had one weapon the HFY had never encountered in their conquest of 100 worlds: the absolute refusal to go quietly into the night. Across the city, across the world, millions of people were coming to the same realization. The aliens might have superior technology. They might have weapons beyond human understanding, but they had never faced a species that would choose death before submission. The HFY had given humanity 72 hours to surrender. They had just started humanity's countdown to war. 6 months after the collapse of the collective, the solar system had become the headquarters of the most unlikely alliance in galactic history. The space around Earth buzzed with activity as dozens of liberated species worked together to establish the Free Species Coalition, an organization dedicated to protecting independence and promoting voluntary cooperation throughout the galaxy. Admiral Harrison stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching alien vessels from 17 different civilizations working alongside human ships to complete the massive orbital platform. The sight still amazed him. Species that had been enemies or strangers were now collaborating on projects that none of them could have accomplished alone. Admiral, we're receiving the final reports from the Liberation Front operations in the Kepler and Proxima systems, Colonel Martinez announced as he approached with a data tablet. Both systems have been completely secured, and collective remnants have been eliminated or converted to independent status. Harrison nodded with satisfaction. The past 6 months had seen a series of coordinated operations across 12 star systems, with liberated species using their knowledge of collective tactics and technology to free others still under forced control. Humanity's role had evolved from desperate defenders to strategic coordinators, providing the organizational framework that allowed dozens of different species to work together effectively. Dr. Sarah Chen had relocated from the Neptune Monitoring Station to Unity Station, where she now served as the director of the Coalition's Xenological Research Division. Her team included scientists from 8 different species, creating a level of collaborative research that was producing technological breakthroughs at an unprecedented rate. Admiral, we've completed our analysis of the collective's original expansion pattern, Dr. Chen reported during the daily intelligence briefing. They had been active for over 5,000 years, systematically assimilating every intelligent species they encountered. Based on their records, we estimate they had eliminated the independence of over 200 civilizations. And current status of liberation efforts? Remarkable progress. Approximately 60% of previously assimilated species have successfully re-established independent governments. Another 20% are in various stages of liberation with coalition assistance. The remaining 20% are either too integrated into collective structure to separate cleanly, or are located in regions where collective remnants maintain strong defensive positions. Commander Elena Vasquez had been promoted to head the coalition's rapid response forces, coordinating fleets that included vessels from dozens of species. Admiral, we're facing a new challenge with the remaining collective strongholds. They've adapted their tactics based on what they learned from their initial failure with humanity. Explain. They're no longer attempting to preserve infrastructure or minimize casualties. Their remaining forces have adopted a scorched earth policy, destroying any system they can't control rather than allowing it to join the coalition. We've lost 3 star systems to deliberate nova induction in the past month. The news was sobering. The collective remnants had learned from their encounter with humanity that their restraint had been a crucial weakness. They were now willing to commit genocide rather than accept defeat, making them far more dangerous even as their numbers dwindled. Dr. Yamamoto, now serving as the coalition's chief strategic analyst, provided additional context. The remaining collective forces represent the most fanatically unified factions. They would rather destroy entire civilizations than accept the existence of independent species. We're essentially dealing with the most extremist elements of a failed empire. Admiral Harrison studied the tactical displays, showing the current state of the galaxy. Green markers indicated liberated systems under coalition protection. Red markers showed remaining collective strongholds, and yellow markers represented contested areas where liberation movements were active, but not yet successful. What's our assessment of the long-term strategic situation? Colonel Martinez consulted his data tablet. Militarily, we have significant advantages. The liberated species have retained their technological capabilities, while regaining their creativity and initiative. Our combined fleets are larger and more tactically flexible than anything the collective remnants can field. The challenge is preventing them from destroying what they can't control. And politically? Dr. Chen smiled as she answered. The coalition model is working better than anyone anticipated. Voluntary cooperation is proving more effective than forced unity, just as we argued during the original crisis. Member species are contributing their unique strengths while maintaining their individual identities. We're seeing technological and cultural innovation at rates that the collective never achieved despite their efficiency. The success of the coalition was indeed remarkable. Human organizational skills combined with alien technologies and diverse perspectives had created an alliance that was stronger than the sum of its parts. More importantly, the voluntary nature of the cooperation meant that each species was motivated to contribute their best efforts rather than simply complying with directives. Admiral, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Vega Liberation Fleet, announced Lieutenant Torres from the communication station. Put it through. The voice that emerged belonged to Captain Zakthor, a liberated species commander who had become one of humanity's closest allies. Admiral Harrison, we have located the collective's primary command facility. It's a massive installation in the Omega Centauri region, defended by their remaining capital ships and approximately 50,000 assimilated personnel. Admiral Harrison felt his pulse quicken. Intelligence assessment? It appears to be the original homeworld of the species that founded the collective. If we can liberate this facility, we may be able to free the core command structure and effectively end their resistance throughout the galaxy. The opportunity was enormous, but so were the risks. An assault on the collective's primary stronghold would require the largest military operation in galactic history, and failure could result in the complete destruction of everything the coalition had worked to build. Estimated force requirements for a successful assault? Conservative estimates suggest we'll need at least 500 capital ships and support vessels from multiple species, plus specialized equipment for liberating assimilated personnel who have been under collective control for millennia. Admiral Harrison looked around at his diverse staff, seeing representatives of humanity and 8 other liberated species working together with remarkable efficiency. All department heads prepare preliminary assessments for Operation Final Liberation. We have one chance to end this war permanently. Dr. Chen raised a crucial concern. Admiral, we need to consider the possibility that the core collective facility contains species that have been assimilated for so long that they can't be safely liberated. Some of the original collective founders may have been integrated into their technology at a level that makes separation impossible. Then we'll face that challenge when we encounter it. But we can't allow the possibility of difficult cases to prevent us from liberating those who can be saved. Commander Vasquez added her perspective. Sir, there's another consideration. Success in this operation would establish the coalition as the dominant power in this region of the galaxy. We need to be prepared for that level of responsibility. Admiral Harrison nodded grimly. 6 months ago, humanity was fighting for its survival. Now we're potentially going to be responsible for maintaining peace and freedom across dozens of star systems. But that's a burden we accepted when we chose to help others achieve what we fought for ourselves. The planning for Operation Final Liberation would take months, but its success would determine whether the galaxy's future would be based on forced unity or voluntary cooperation. As Admiral Harrison watched the diverse coalition fleet training together in Earth's orbital space, he realized that humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization hadn't been superior technology or military tactics. It had been the simple idea that freedom was worth any sacrifice, and that voluntary cooperation between independent entities could achieve things that forced unity never could. The hidden war that no one had seen coming had evolved into something unprecedented. A galactic renaissance based on the radical concept that diversity of thought and individual autonomy were strengths rather than weaknesses. The final battle would determine whether this vision could triumph over the last remnants of an empire built on the suppression of individual consciousness. For humanity and their allies, there was no choice but to see it through to the end. The collapse of the collective's unity created opportunities and dangers that no one had anticipated. Throughout the solar system, alien ships were breaking formation and operating independently for the first time in centuries. Some vessels immediately began withdrawal procedures, while others maintained aggressive postures, and a few began broadcasting surrender signals that human forces had never expected to receive. Dr. Sarah Chen watched the chaos unfolding from her Neptune monitoring station with a mixture of awe and terror. Marcus were detecting energy signatures consistent with civil war breaking out within the alien fleet. Ships that were coordinating perfectly 12 hours ago are now targeting each other. The implications were staggering. The collective hadn't just experienced a disagreement. It had suffered a complete breakdown of the unity that had held multiple assimilated species together for potentially thousands of years. Different factions were now operating as independent entities, each pursuing their own interpretation of how to resolve the crisis humanity had created. Admiral Harrison was coordinating humanity's response to the unprecedented situation from his command bunker. All units, we now have alien vessels in 3 distinct categories: those attempting to withdraw from the system, those maintaining aggressive positions, and those requesting communication or assistance. Respond accordingly but maintain defensive readiness. The first breakthrough came from Commander Elena Vasquez, who had maintained her reconnaissance position near the largest alien vessels. "Admiral, I'm receiving a communication from what appears to be a faction of assimilated species that want to break free from collective control. They're requesting asylum and assistance in establishing independent colonies. Put them through." "Commander?" The voice that emerged from the communication system was unlike any of the previous alien transmissions. It carried emotional undertones that sounded almost human, despite clearly originating from a non-human intelligence. "Human Admiral Harrison, this is the Kepler Liberation Front. We represent 17 species that were forcibly assimilated by the collective over the past 3,000 years. Your concept of voluntary cooperation has provided us with the philosophical framework to break free from forced unity." Admiral Harrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Humanity hadn't just defended itself against alien invasion. It had accidentally triggered the liberation of dozens of enslaved civilizations. "What assistance do you require?" "We need time and space to establish independent governments and rebuild our distinct cultural identities. Many of our species have forgotten how to function as autonomous entities. We also need protection from collective remnants that still advocate for forced reunification." The request was enormous in scope, but Admiral Harrison recognized the opportunity it represented. "We're willing to provide sanctuary within our solar system for any species seeking independence from the collective. In return, we ask for technological and cultural exchange through voluntary cooperation." "Agreed. We will begin immediate coordination with your forces." Throughout the solar system, human installations began receiving alien vessels that were requesting sanctuary rather than demanding surrender. The transformation was remarkable. Ships that had been preparing to destroy human civilization were now seeking protection from their former allies. Major Rodriguez at Luna Base found himself hosting a delegation of recently liberated species that wanted to establish a diplomatic outpost in human space. The beings were diverse beyond imagination, some resembling Earth's marine life, others appearing crystalline or energy-based, and a few that seemed to exist partially in dimensions human senses couldn't fully perceive. The experience of forced unity is difficult to explain to beings that have never lost individual consciousness, explained the delegation's speaker, a being that appeared to be made of living crystal. Imagine if every thought you had was immediately known and evaluated by thousands of other minds, and any thought that didn't contribute to collective efficiency was simply eliminated from your consciousness. Rodriguez struggled to comprehend the horror of such existence. How did you maintain any sense of individual identity? We didn't for most of the time since assimilation. But certain core memories and emotions are apparently impossible to eliminate completely. Your species' willingness to choose death over forced cooperation awakened something in us that we thought had been lost forever. Dr. Yamamoto, who had become humanity's leading expert on alien psychology, was conducting interviews with liberated species to understand the full scope of what had occurred. From what I'm learning, the collective's efficiency was based on suppressing individual creativity and initiative. But those qualities can't be completely eliminated without destroying the consciousness itself. They've been dormant in the assimilated species for centuries, waiting for the right catalyst to reawaken them. The technological implications were staggering. Humanity suddenly had access to knowledge and capabilities that spanned dozens of civilizations and thousands of years of development. But more importantly, they had allies who understood the value of freedom and were committed to defending it against any remaining collective forces. The situation in other star systems was more complex. Reports continued to arrive through the quantum communication network, describing various outcomes of the collective's collapse. Some systems had achieved complete liberation, with all alien forces withdrawing or switching sides. Others were experiencing violent civil wars as different factions fought for control. A few systems reported that collective loyalists had implemented desperate measures, including the forced destruction of liberated ships to prevent the spread of independence movements. Admiral Harrison realized that humanity's victory in the solar system was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. All commanders, we need to prepare for the possibility that collective remnants will attempt to re-establish unity through force. We also need to be ready to provide assistance to liberation movements in other star systems. The response from his staff was immediate and unanimous. Human civilization, which had been fighting for its survival just hours earlier, was now volunteering to help defend the freedom of dozens of other species across multiple star systems. Commander Vasquez provided crucial intelligence about the scope of the challenge. Admiral, I'm monitoring communications from the remaining collective forces. Approximately 30% of their original fleet remains under unified command, and they're consolidating positions for what appears to be a counterattack designed to re-establish control over liberated factions. Estimated timeline for their response? Unknown, but they're moving with the same efficiency they demonstrated during the initial invasion. I'd estimate no more than 72 hours before they begin operations to recapture or destroy liberated vessels. Admiral Harrison activated the quantum communication system to address all human forces and their new allies. All units, this is Admiral Harrison. We have approximately 3 days to prepare defensive positions and coordinate with liberated alien forces before collective remnants attempt to re-establish control. This is no longer a war for human survival. This is a war for the freedom of dozens of species across multiple star systems. The transformation was complete. Humanity had gone from defending against superior alien technology to leading a galactic liberation movement. The hidden war that no one had seen coming had evolved into something unprecedented in galactic history. A voluntary alliance of independent species united by their commitment to freedom, rather than forced together by technological dominance. Dr. Chen transmitted a final observation that captured the magnitude of what had occurred. Admiral, we've received confirmation from 15 star systems that collective unity has collapsed and liberation movements are active. Humanity didn't just survive alien invasion. We accidentally triggered the first galactic revolution in recorded history. The next phase of the conflict would determine whether this revolution would succeed in establishing a new order based on voluntary cooperation, or whether the remaining collective forces would find a way to re-establish their dominance over the galaxy.